We were told that you were out on water patrol. All right, we're going to call this to order, though.
Let's work it, let's do it. I love it.
All right, I'll call the Crow Wing County Committee of the Whole meeting for October 21st, 2025 to order. First up, Mr. Pence. Good morning.
Good morning. So I have a couple items on the agenda for you this morning. The first is I was asked to do a planning and zoning 101 and just kind of do just a brief overview of just kind of how we do planning and zoning in the county, what are some of the statutory requirements, some of the rule requirements that we're mandated to follow, and just to kind of give an overview of that. And so, am I able to toggle myself here, or? Okay, awesome. So we're just gonna, and then when I'm finished with that, I have some, Gary and I have some proposed ordinance updates we'd like to discuss with the board to see, kind of get some direction as far as that. And so we're gonna go through and just kind of start, and if there's any questions, I'm gonna go through this. Some areas maybe quicker than others, try to get some spots I think are maybe more important, but just kind of trying to lay the framework a little bit for how planning and zoning, how land use applies within the county. So if you look at our ordinance at the very beginning, there's always a purpose. Every ordinance has a reason for it. And you've got some, so our ordinance purposes are to implement the comprehensive plan, orderly development, to create land use districts. We're going to regulate the location, height, and size of structures. We're going to preserve economic and natural environment of shorelands, structure setbacks, the size of parcels, overcrowding of land, which is really impervious coverage limits. We want to see compatible development, maintain our natural resources, and upgrade non-compliant septic systems. That's really one of the keys to what we're trying to accomplish, or what the ordinance's purpose is.
And you know what? Can I ask a question? So on that, for example, the one thing that pops up is the impervious surface. A lot of that people are like, what's this all about? That's actually in statute, or that's a state. Can you just drill down on that just a little bit? That isn't us.
Yep, absolutely. And I'll go in that a little bit further too into the presentation, but yeah, absolutely. When we're dealing with the, within 1,000 feet of a lake, there's definite requirements in Minnesota Rule 6120, and they do have caps impervious limits on those lots at 25%. And so that's a rule that we have to, there's a minimum standard that we have to follow for planning and zoning around the shoreline, around lakes, streams, and rivers. And one of those is that impervious coverage. And so that's the intent of one of the purposes, is to prevent that. We want to prevent the overcrowding of structures and those higher impervious, because that's what causes detrimental impacts to water quality and to groundwater and surface water.
Okay.
Yeah, she's not moving.
That always happens.
All right. So then just some key objectives. Again, you're going to hear, as we go through this, there's health, safety, and general welfare. That's kind of a legal phrase that's often used when looking at planning and zoning type activities. Again, we're here to protect, enhance our water quality. I think that's a really important aspect of our county. It's a big driver of our tax base. There are certain uses in the county that we want to protect. There's agriculture, there's forestry, wildlife habitat, where we have the shoreline areas. And so we have certain requirements in those areas to protect those from being overdeveloped. We want to make sure that from a development standpoint, we have proper lot sizes, we have performance standards, we want to reduce conflicts between neighbors, and we want to reduce conflict between residential and commercial industrial uses. And so as we look at our land use map, you'll see kind of the method as to how we're trying to accomplish that in the county. Just to give you an idea for permit numbers, last year we issued a total of 1,178 permits with 204 new construction and 443 septics, residential, and 8 commercial. Just to give you an idea of where we're at this year. As of today, year to date, we're at 1,032 permits, so that's a 2% increase over where we were last year. We've issued 186 permits for new homes. We're 6% over where that was last year. Residential septics, we're at 403 already this year. That's a 7% over last year. And then we've got some commercial septics that we've installed too. We have 11 this year compared to 6 last year. So we're definitely maintaining and seeing the permits are staying steady as far as that. So that's, I think, a good sign to see that there's still some development happening within the county. We'll go to the next slide. So again, as I mentioned earlier, there are some requirements that we have to follow. There are some enabling legislation, which is 394. That's what gives us the ability to have planning and zoning activities in the county. And we have all these different rules that we have that we're mandated to implement. 6120 is our the shoreline rules. 8420 is the Wetland Conservation Act. 7080 is the septic system requirements. We have Minnesota Rules 4410, which is environmental review, which deal with like environmental assessment worksheets and that. And then we have other ordinances that we do that we're not mandated to do, but we have chosen to do as a county, like short-term rentals. We have like a solid waste, junk nuisance, those sorts of things. So there are some things that we have to do, and there's some things that we're choosing to do in addition to those requirements from the state.
So a question on this one. So I see you say statute, but then you say rule. Now, when you say rule, is it statute? Is it under the statute?
Correct.
And some agency has made this rule?
Yeah, and so the way that it comes from a statutory standpoint is that there is 103, the statute's 103G is typically the statute that governs most of what happens for water and these requirements that you have as far as the Wetland Conservation Act, the shoreline rules, septic. There's enabling legislation that puts that into place, and then that says now, and then it will go to like, so for example, the DNR is responsible for the shoreline rules, and the Board of Water and Soil Resources is responsible for the Wetland Conservation Act, and then the MPCA is responsible for the septic system requirements. And so you have a statute, and then you have a rule that really implements that statute. And depending on how the statute was put into place, that's what authority that those agencies have as far as updating the rules.
Rule-making authority.
Correct. And some are different than others. So if you look at like the shoreline rules, those haven't been updated since 1989. The Wetland Conservation Act is being updated, just was recently updated within the last 12 months. Minnesota Rule 7080, the septic system rules, those were updated back in 2013 was the last time those were up. No, 2008 was when those were last updated.
So when somebody wants to put an addition onto their house, and then we're requiring a septic inspection, that's because of this?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, we have to have septic inspections when you're within the shoreline district. When you get a permit, you have to have your septic inspected. Yep. So we'll go to the next screen. So again, Minnesota Statute 394, this is the legislation that enables counties to actually do planning and zoning. It's all a very dictated, prescriptive process that the state has given the county permission to be able to do. If you're a city or a township, you would be under Minnesota Statutes 462. That's their enabling legislation that allows them to do planning and zoning. And so just to be, we're not going to read through this, but I just kind of clipped a couple pieces out of the statute. Again, so 394.21 gives us the authority to do planning and zoning. 0.23, which says that we have to have a comprehensive plan, is required as part of doing planning and zoning and having an ordinance. We'll go to that next one, Amber. And so then this allows us to once we have a comprehensive plan, then we have official controls. That is what puts into, and that's what it meant to implement the comprehensive plan for the county. We can go to the next slide. And so the way that it's set up is that the state says that we're supposed to set districts by basically set land use districts or zoning districts. That's what this requires us to do, have that put into place. We can go to the next one. Yep, and so this again basically tells us the parameters as far as what we're allowed to regulate. You can look in here, it talks about limiting the location, height, width, bulk, type of foundation, number of stories, size of dwellings, buildings, and structures, and other pieces that we can regulate. So this is what we're allowed to regulate is very called out clearly by the state and what we can and can't do from a county perspective. You can go to the next map. Again, Minnesota Statute 304 creates the Board of Adjustment, it creates the Planning Commission, it gives us rules as far as how we're supposed to run public hearings, how we're supposed to handle conditional use permits, nonconformities, all of those aspects. So a lot of times I think people think that counties have a lot of discretion as far as what they do with some of their land use, and we don't. It's very prescriptive. The state basically gives us the rules that we're supposed to follow as we're going through variances, conditional use permits, nonconformities, and the like.
So why would you, why would the, just a curiosity question, so why would the state want us to create like a Board of Adjustment and a Planning and Zoning Commission rather than having the county board do that? We can't do all of that by
Right.
statute.
That's a great question, why they did that. I believe that thanks, Jim. I believe that like 394 was actually adopted back in the 50s, so it's been quite a while that's been around. I think, you know, what they're trying to get maybe is uniformity across the board and trying to make things to be consistent. And so I think there might have been at some point, some counties were doing it in different ways, and the legislature said, this is how we want to see it happen. And so I think it's meant to try to get citizen input through the Planning Commission and the Board of Adjustment process. But I really can't tell you why they took that authority, you know, as far as, because like a variance, the county board can't approve a variance even if it wanted to. That's authority that's delegated directly to the Board of Adjustment. So a city has that ability to actually approve variances if they so choose at a city level, but counties don't have that authority.
Were you going to say something?
And then, again, counties have the ability, county boards can approve a conditional use permit or an interim use permit if so chose. You have delegated that to your Planning Commission and Board of Adjustment to make those decisions, but some counties have the recommendation coming from the final decision is made at the county board level. So there is flexibility on conditional use and interim use permits. There is no flexibility on plats and land use map amendments or zoning map. That does reside with the county board to make those final decisions.
Chris, in some counties, the Board of Adjustment is actually separate from the Planning Commission and has actually a separate,
Yep, separate
different
boards.
people on it.
Yep.
Some of them I've seen have actually commissioners that actually sit on one or the other.
Yep.
Board of
So
Adjustment.
The Planning Commission some counties will have a Planning Commission member will be a member of the county board will sit on the Planning Commission. And
Planning Commission or Board of Adjustment?
Planning Commission. Yeah,
Okay.
Board of Adjustment is separate from the county board. So that doesn't, there's a member on the Planning Commission, but wouldn't be a member on the Board of Adjustment.
In ours, we have it put together.
We have a
And
combination.
that's allowed for in statute?
Yep, it sure is. Yep.
And John, it used to be, or Commissioner Lubke, it used to be separated. I actually was, for a while, I was Commissioner Jim Hill's appointee on the Board of Adjustment. At that time, they were separate.
Yep. And a lot of other counties have followed suit. We made that change back in 2009, and other counties have followed suit and combined their Planning Commission and Board of Adjustment into one entity, so. No go. So just to give you just a real quick summary, we have the county is separated into land use districts. So the shoreline district, which I had mentioned, is 1,000 feet around lakes, it's 300 feet around streams and rivers, and then it's 500 feet around the Mississippi River. We have 3 lake classifications: general development, recreational development, and natural environment. Then we also have river classifications that are separate from that. And then once you get out of the shoreline district, then we have what's called the non-shoreline or the rural residential districts, where you have, depending on the location, you have the R1, the R2.5, R5, and R10. That's basically lot sizes. So if you're in the R2.5, it's a minimum 2.5 acre lot size with 165 feet wide. R5, same R10. It's just more of a density. We have our agricultural forestry zoning. That's a 35 acre minimum. And so a lot of times you'll see land use map amendments come in where people will be zoned agricultural forestry and they want to change the zoning to an R5 and R10 so they could subdivide some of that property. The intent for that 35 acre was to preserve those larger tracts in those areas that was deemed to be agricultural, forested land within the county. A lot of it on the north side of the county is forested. On the south side of the county, a lot of that is the agricultural. We have our commercial zoning. We have our waterfront commercial zoning, which is our riparian lots for those resorts and campgrounds. And then we have the commercial industrial, where there's more of our high intense uses. For example, Klaus stamping up north of Merrifield would meet that category. We'll go to the next slide.
Chris, before you move on to that side, these are defined by the county.
These
are created by the county and laid out from that. There's no statutory requirements that says you have to have these certain types of districts.
Correct. So the 394 lists out, if you're going to do zoning in the non-shoreland, what those typical categories, generally speaking, would look like. Yep.
But I thought at some point we had more categories and we kind of condensed it down at some point, didn't we?
We did.
Okay.
Yeah, we combined our commercial 1, commercial 2
Okay, yeah,
into
yeah,
one
I
district,
remember
our
that.
commercial light industrial, commercial heavy industrial into one, and.
Sure.
Yep, so we did consolidate some of our zoning districts down. So this is just to give you an idea of what they might look like on the map. This is Lake Edward, up in Lake Edward Township. The area that you see in the yellow is a 2.5 acre zoning. The area that you see in blue is the shoreline district around the different lakes. This purple or this pink color would be the commercial district, and the red that you would see here would be the waterfront commercial district. This would be cloud stamping here. This the gray color that would be the commercial industrial. So you know, it's a kind of a checkerboard type of zoning depending on where you're located in the county, but the idea is to try to get similar uses within the area, trying to avoid conflicts with neighboring properties, and orderly development is really the intent of what we're looking for. We'll go to the next page.
Did you say the shoreline district is actually, the rules and statute, that comes actually from state statute for shoreline?
It does.
It does,
Yep.
okay.
Yep, Minnesota Rule 6120.
Right.
Defines 1,000 feet around the lake, 300 feet around the stream. And then we have the Mississippi Headwaters Board, which is separate from that, which is 500 feet for the river.
But do we have some latitude then in that shoreline district to do some different things, or is it pretty much just spelled out in statute?
We have we can be more restrictive than what the rule says, but we can't be less restrictive unless we get, there's a process with the DNR that you can go through to get, if there's a reason why you think something that would be less restrictive would actually accomplish the rule. There are some things that you can do to be less restrictive, but typically it's meeting the minimum standard is the requirement. So when you look at the different land uses in the county, we have allowed uses, permitted uses, conditional, interim, and then those that are not allowed. You know, an allowed use is somebody, you know, who wants to farm their property, somebody who wants to raise cattle. There are some uses that you just get to use your property for, and it's an allowed use. Some uses are permitted where you have to come to the county and apply for a permit and receive a permit. Then you have your conditional and your interim uses. Those require public hearings and neighborhood notification and review and approval by the Planning Commission Board of Adjustment. And then depending on the location of where you're at in the county, some uses simply aren't allowed. And if we go to the next slide, we can look at that. So this comes out of Article 10. Excuse me. And it gives you an idea of the uses are on the left side, and then across the top you see where the land use districts are. And then in the columns, it tells you what type of a permit would be required for that type of activity. So for example, single-family dwellings, if you, that across the board is a permitted activity, unless you're in the commercial industrial, that would require a conditional use permit. If you want to build a duplex, that is a permitted activity, unless on the shoreline district, there's some requirements that DNR has to be able to build a duplex in the shoreline, but the non-shoreline, it's a permitted activity. When you get into the 3-family triplex, depending on its location, it's a permit or a conditional use permit. So there are different, and like I mentioned before, farmland crop growing and harvesting, that is an allowed use in all the districts. Same as far as livestock, poultry, that. We have some restrictions where we don't want to see some things happening in the waterfront commercial or commercial industrial as far as livestock, but those are, you kind of get an idea of the allowed permit, and if there's a blank where there's no letter in it, that means it's not an allowed use within that district. If we go to that next slide. This is just to give you some idea of what we have for our commercial uses. If you wanted to, say, do an adult use, that's an interim use permit in our agricultural forestry district. Everybody would say, well, that might be an interesting location for a type of an adult use. If you look at the way the county zoning map is laid out, there isn't any agricultural forested land on a major road. And so if you want to have an adult use, that's fine. It's just going to be out in the middle of a cornfield somewhere. And so we are not allowed to prohibit uses outright anywhere in the county. We have to have an area where they're allowed to be done, but the county does get to dictate where those uses happen. So same thing for, you know, gravel pits. We have a lot of folks who think they don't want a gravel pit because they're concerned about how it might affect their property. We have gravel pits. They're called an extractive use. They're an interim use across. You can see they're allowed in the agricultural forest district, rural residential 2.5, 5 or 10, and commercial industrial or the airport district. So, but we're not going to allow those in the shoreline district and that. So this kind of gives you an idea of where we allow certain types of commercial activities and what type of permits would be needed to accomplish those.
Chris, you ready for a hypothetical?
Go for it.
Okay. So let's say you're out at somebody's place out, let's say it's agricultural, forested, or no, let's just say, okay, I'm not going to go down that road, but let's say it's 40 acres and you're standing there and this guy is probably 6'7" and you're looking up at him and here, he's got like 150 cars there and he doesn't have a junkyard permit or anything. And you're telling him, hey, you can't do that here. And he says, why? This is my land. Mm-hmm. What would you tell him?
Well, I would tell them that the county has adopted ordinances that regulate how land is used within the county. I would explain that we have a junk yard ordinance that he could try to apply to get that to allow him to have that on the property. Otherwise, I would focus on, we have a solid waste ordinance that limits the amount of unlicensed vehicles you can have on your property, and that I'd offer ways to find compliance and timelines that would work for him to try to choose whatever option it is that he thought made the most sense on his property. And if all of those options didn't make any sense to him, then I would refer over to the county attorney's office and ask them to intervene and see if they thought that this was something that would require that they would step in and help gain compliance on the property.
Mm-hmm. I guess if I was out there with you, I would say to him that, yeah, this is your property, but in essence, you're kind of leasing it. Well, what do you mean? Well, you're not going to live forever.
Right.
And then you make a mess here and you got oil and you got cars and then when you're gone, somebody else has to go through the process of cleaning that up. A lot of people don't understand that. They ruin their property or they, you know, and I used to be one like Dewey Towges, Commissioner Towges, when he was here, he was just like me, you know, I'm a property rights guy, but I think I've kind of evolved of understanding that, yes, this person has property rights, but what about the person that's right next to him?
Right.
Don't they have any property rights when what you're doing on your property is having an effect next door?
Absolutely, and I think our role from a county level is to try to find that balance of making sure that people do get to use their property and they do pay taxes and it is property they own. But we want to ensure that they're not doing things that are detrimental to the neighboring property. Or, I mean, the last thing we want to have happen is something that somebody would have some sort of a spill in their property and would contaminate the groundwater aquifer.
Right.
Well, that's a big problem, not just for you, because we always say that the groundwater and surface water doesn't really pay much attention to property lines and that it is where it is, and so we want to make sure that those aren't contaminated and polluted. And so those are some of there's reasons behind, what we're trying to accomplish with these.
That's
and
what I
not
was
just
getting
being
at.
the heavy hand of government. We're trying to, make sure that you go back to that slide at the very beginning. We're out to really protect the health, safety, and the general welfare of the county. Right. And I think those are some of the things that we can do that would make, I think, a big difference in making sure that, for future generations, people can drill a well and feel confident they can drink the water that comes out of it.
Exactly. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Chris, if we went around the county, 990 some square miles or whatever it is, we went around the county and we said, boy, we need to look at every piece of property to see what it's listed as and make sure they're doing everything right on that piece of property. That would be a tremendous chore, and it would be just a little bit sticking your nose really where it doesn't belong. So most of the stuff comes to us, if we have to address it, comes to us as complaint-driven.
Correct.
If all the neighbors around don't have a problem that you got 50 cars in your backyard, is it our problem?
Unless there's a complaint, otherwise.
there's a complaint, and I think
Otherwise,
that's the-
we couldn't,
that's the crux.
we couldn't hire enough people to go around like, and drive by every place and see if there's violations. I don't think we could afford that. I mean,
Well, and
and
I-
nor
and I
would I
think-
ever support that.
I think if you look at anybody with any, maybe in town it might be a little different, but you get any town where or any area where you got 2.5 or 5 acres, I bet you could go almost every one of them and find something that could be a violation if you wanted to.
I'm sure.
But it should be complaint driven. We shouldn't be running around like the land cops unless, Eric needs something else to do back there.
Well,
He did. Thank you for
we'd be thrilled. if
answering for him.
We'd be thrilled if the sheriff wants to chase all the junk calls that we get, but we take those calls when we get them, and we go out and respond and try to help landowners, navigate that process. And the thing I always advise people to know, especially those that are making the complaints, is that, somebody didn't accumulate a bunch of cars in, a couple days, and so it takes more than a couple days to get rid of them. And so as long as we have people who are willing to work with us, and over time can, if they can start getting a few cars off, even per month, it's a definite improvement over what was there in the past. And sometimes it might take a little bit of time, but at the end, having that patience and willing to work with landowners to meet them where they are and to assist with that, I think is much more beneficial than trying to come in real heavy-handed and trying to,
But
start
after
pounding
saying,
ourselves.
saying that, when we run into open sewer health issues, immediate health threats, those are addressed.
That's a different situation.
It's a
So
whole different situation.
if we have a situation where somebody's septic system is surfacing and it's on the ground, we are going to have response once we're aware of it. There'll be expectations of things that have to happen within 24 hours by the landowner to correct and seal. And if not, then we will invoke public health and come back to you guys for permission to get in there and do it ourselves. So there are some things that we have some patience with, and some things that we have to respond more quickly just because of the severity of what is happening.
Thank you.
Let's go to the next slide, please. Again, just to show and the different uses and just the different tables, I won't go into any more detail on this, but it gives you an idea of every time you see the CU or the IU, that's going to be something before the Planning Commission Board of Adjustment. And so there's quite a few things that comes to that board to make some decisions on how people use their property. And so just wanted to make sure everybody understood how and why we determined when somebody has to apply for certain types of permits. We can go to the next slide.
Have we been using interim uses a lot, or is that becoming more and more?
That's relatively new for Crow Wing County.
For Crow Wing County, I know others have used it.
Yep, so as we've made some ordinance updates lately, some of the changes as far as what's required in interim use would be gravel pits. The event centers are now an interim use permit. Any sort of cannabis, commercial cannabis use is an interim use permit. So those are pretty much the big three that require an interim use permit. The rest are typically conditional use permits.
Can you see in the future using more and more IUs?
I can. It depends on the situation. Interim use permits are really a conditional use permit where you can put a timing perspective on it to say it either applies to a certain landowner or say this is valid for a 5-year time frame. I think there are some permit requests that make sense that we would want to have that requirement on there, and there are some that I think a conditional use permit where it's a use that's granted for the property, I think makes sense. And so I feel pretty comfortable where we're at now with how we've got those spelled out, but definitely open to discussion, into the future if we think there's a need or a reason to make some updates as far as that.
What is the timeline on conditional use permit? If it was, let's say, to be for I'll just use a car lot, and it was a conditional use permit, and it's no longer a car lot, it hasn't been a car lot for so long, what is that timeline? Is there a timeline there?
Our ordinance does not limit conditional use permit expirations. Some counties do have an ordinance that says if your conditional use permit hasn't been implemented or used for, say, a year that it then expires. That's not something that we have in our
As far as
ordinance.
county, I know in cities, it looks a lot more in a city where
Yep.
that was a beauty shop, and now it's no longer been a beauty shop, and so it's
Yep.
kind of, if you
Yeah,
want
it would really be at the discretion of the board if that was something that was wanted to be implemented as far as what the board wanted to do.
yeah. But otherwise, it stays with the property for
It
the
does stay
life
with
of the property.
For the life of the property, yep. Yep.
And an IU does not?
An interviews permit is, we would issue, so if, let's say that you were to come in, Commissioner Coring, and apply for an interviews permit because you wanted to have an event center, maybe at your property, and then down the road you sold that to, Commissioner Lubke, he would have to come in and then reapply for that permit.
Okay.
It would typically, interviews permits either will transfer at, will cease their approval when property transfers, or if there's a time frame that said this is valid, like we might issue a gravel pit permit, and so you can take gravel out of that pit for 2 years, and then, and after that, you need to come back in and apply for another interviews permit.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah, so I mean, it gives a little bit of flexibility for some of those types of uses where timing might really be imperative to what's
And
occurring
an
and the
IU
impact of the neighborhood.
is not, still has to go before the planning commission?
Absolutely, goes to the planning commission, they have final approval, it gets recorded on the deed,
And the county board doesn't have final approval on it?
county board does not.
Okay.
It's not a land use change, is it?
An interviews?
Yeah, interim use?
No, so the land use map amendment is when you actually update the zoning
Right.
map. The interim use permit is the same as a conditional use permit, the same process, the same neighborhood notification, except for the ability to put ownership for, to limit the length of the permit through ownership and/or through just a timing perspective that you could put in.
And conditional use permits don't come to the county board either?
No, neither one come to the county board, and those are
Pardon me?
perpetual. They do not come to the county board.
Only land use change.
Yep, only the land and plats. Yep, you guys.
Land use map amendment.
Yep, and plats come to the county board. Yep.
And then if somebody doesn't like the conditional use permit, the appeal process is not the county board?
It is
it's
not,
District
no.
court?
Actually, so if somebody were to come in and want to dispute a variance, they have 30 days to appeal that to district court.
Okay.
If somebody wanted to come in and dispute and appeal a conditional use permit or an interim use permit, that goes to the Court of Appeals.
Okay.
And you have 60 days to file that appeal for that one.
Okay. Okay.
So we'll go, so again, this is Minnesota Rule 6120. This is the shoreline rules. This is the one that drives most of the activities within our office as far as permitting. And so again, we're not going to go into these details here, but if we go to the next slide, this is where you'll hear we have a shoreline alteration permit that people can apply for, and these are the items that really tie back to what's in the shoreline rules and Article 11 of our ordinance. So shoreline alterations are things like water, like sheds done by the water, sand blankets, ice ridge removals, stairways, patios, dirt moving vegetation, bluffs, and steep slopes. Those are really the activities that would really revolve around the 6120 and then Article 11 of our ordinance. Go to the next slide. So just as a reminder, the setback on a general development lake is 75 feet, and that gets split in half. So we have shore impact zone 1 and shore impact zone 2. Depends where you're located, depending on what type of activities would be a permitted use or a use that's not allowed. And so for general development lake, it's 37.5 feet and 75 is shore impact zone 2. Then you get into a recreational development lake. That is, the first half of that would be a 50-foot setback, and the second would be, and then back to 100 feet. Natural environment lakes are 150-foot setback, and then we have a natural environment special shallow, and that is a 180-foot setback on those. And each one of those setbacks is divided in half. So as we go into the next few slides, you're going to hear shore impact zone 1 and shore impact zone 2, kind of give you an idea of what part of the setback we're talking about.
Chris, is there any way you can just explain to me, I mean, it's just kind of more of a curiosity question, what is a general development lake, and who says it's a general development lake? Who says it's a recreational development lake? Who designates that, and can you just explain what?
The DNR sets the classification of lakes.
Oh, they
So
do?
The DNR classifies the lakes, and so a general development lake is going to be a Gull Lake. It's going to be a Pelican. It's going to be a North Long Lake, a Round Lake. Our larger lakes are more developed lakes. Some of our recreational development lakes will be more of the mid-sized lakes, like say some of the Bass Lakes like by Merrifield are recreational development. So it's lakes that are still relatively a larger size, but not as big as those other lakes. And then when you get to the natural environment lakes, those ones I call those a glorified duck pond. Those are just those small lakes. They're typically 100 acres or so and typically pretty shallow. And then we have a special setback on the DNR has set these natural environment special shallow lakes, and so those are just a little bit more shallow than your natural environment, and so those have a little bit more protection on that. So the DNR has classified every lake in the state, and then they, based on 6120, that tells us what lakes we have to regulate and which ones we don't have to regulate. So if you are in a city, you've got to regulate every lake that's 10 acres in size or more in a city. In the county, it's any lake that's 25 acres in size or more we were required to regulate. And then so then we've got a protected water inventory that's not in the ordinance. It's a separate standalone document that lists all the lakes, all the rivers, and it tells you what the ordinary high water mark setback elevation is. It'll tell you what, if it's a flood issue, what its base flood elevation is, what its regulatory flood protection elevation is, the lake classification, and then every lake in the state's got a division of waters number to it. Crow Wing County is 18 dash. And so if you're in Aiken County, it's 01 dash, it's just basically alphabetical. So all of our lakes start with an 18, and then there's a dash, and then there's a number that the DNR has classified when they set their public waters inventory.
The DNR doesn't change that at all, do they?
We've talked about it, and I was told that they made a really good choice when they did that inventory back in the 60s and 70s, and they don't really want to change it. So we've had discussions about Bay Lake. Bay Lake is a recreational development lake, and Artie Lake. It's a general development lake, and it should be classified as a general development lake. And you'll see most of our variances are on Bay Lake. We have a lot of them just because of the setback being 100 feet instead of 75 feet. And so I've had that conversation with the DNR, and they said when they classified it the first time, they got it right.
So even though the rules are there and the lake is classified, somebody can still come in and get a variance to do something that doesn't meet those rules?
Correct. Yep, absolutely. So that takes you back to 394 with the creation of the Board of Adjustment, with the recognition that not every lake lot and not every situation is going to be able to meet the standards of today's ordinance. And so they put in their parameters for what you would, how you would get how to apply for a variance and what the standards are. It's a practical difficulty is what the standards are for a variance. And that's across the board statewide for counties, cities, or townships if they do their own zoning.
And that board makes that decision?
They do. And for the counties, the Board of Adjustment, when the Planning Commission Board of Adjustment, when they're in the role of the Board of Adjustment, they are the decision-making authority on variances.
Okay.
So Chris, another question. So I know I talked to somebody one time when they had a cabin on North Long Lake and they were going to tear it down. They were going to build a house. And it was designated like a floodplain. But that's like somebody in Washington looking at drawing the line, isn't it? Or how does that work? Or
Kinda. So you're talking about, when you look at 6120, that's the shoreline / floodplain regulations for the state. And so what the federal government has basically, it's all top down. Everything kind of seems to trickle its way down. So the federal government has delegated to the DNR, to the state, to manage floodplains within the state. And so then the state works and puts into effect these floodplain maps. And so our floodplain maps were updated in 2015, and they're all on our county website through GIS. And when I mentioned earlier, that base flood elevation, that is the elevation that basically is set from a federal level that the state puts into place, that the counties have to implement, and cities and townships, where you have the BFE, or the base flood elevation, is where they say there's a 1% chance with a 100-year flood event of there being a flood there. And so if you're in that area, you have to build a foot above that, which is called your regulatory flood protection elevation. I tell you, this is so exciting, guys. It's just, it's just really fun.
Renee, we're getting educated. That's what this is for.
So, and we have a lot of that floodplain. It's called the flood fringe, and that's a whole another conversation we could have that would take some time to chat through all the
But then this
options for
person
that.
had to buy some wetland credits too, I believe.
And that's a
then,
different, that's two different processes.
Okay.
And so, that would go through the Wetland Conservation Act. And so, building in the flood fringe doesn't always mean you're building in a wetland at the same time.
Okay.
Sometimes you do, but typically, but generally speaking, it's not how, but the situation on North Long is a different animal, because if you go up to, say, start by BIR and come around the south side of North Long, that was all filled swamp from back before there were any regulations at all. And unfortunately, fortunately, depending how you look at it, some of the filling wasn't done effectively. And so people still want, when they build down there, it still has wetland characteristics, and so there's a process to go through to be able to impact that, to build and do development for driveways and that.
okay.
We can go to the next slide. So I'm just going to try to go through these quickly. Feel free to let me know if you have any questions. We allow a water-oriented accessory structure on residential properties to be 120 feet in size, 12 feet in height. It's got to be a 20-foot setback. If you're commercial, you get 250 square feet and 15 feet in height. You can't live in it, it can't be a house. It's meant for storage of your toys and fishing rods and that.
So it's a 20-foot setback? I thought the side yard setback was always 10 feet.
No, this is 20 feet from the lake.
Oh, 20 feet from the lake.
Still have to meet that 10-foot.
10-foot side, okay.
Yep.
And that doesn't matter what lake you're on, whether you're on natural environment, recreational, or general?
It does not.
They're all the same?
That is not correct. And the state would allow you to have a 250 square foot building down by the lake 10 feet away, is what the state rule allows. And so we've adopted 120 square feet, 20 feet back, is what the county's adopted.
The 20-foot setback is measured from the OHW.
Correct. For Northern High, yeah, exactly, for Northern High Water Mark, yeah.
And those are all laid out really well for everybody, and so you know what that is on every lake?
We
Every
require,
piece of property, the ordinary high water mark?
so if you remember back in 2024, you changed the ordinance to require surveys for riparian parcels.
Right.
And so we do require surveys for riparian parcels. Situations like this, we wouldn't maybe require a survey as much as we require a surveyor to go out and put a stake where the OHW is so we can verify that setback. But yeah, we're getting surveys now to verify where structures are being located so that they're being put in the right spot. Yeah.
Because that isn't really a delineated mark by the DNR, that they didn't go.
It
put
is.
stakes.
It's a set, it's every, most, especially more of our developed lakes have a set elevation, they have a set elevation that they use. There's not anything, there's not like marks around the lake that say, here's where they, it's just, what they do is they'll go to like, say, a boat landing and they'll set a benchmark. And that'll be used to set the elevation for the OHW. And so we have landowners contact a surveyor to be able to go out and set that ordinary high water mark, because we're not surveyors, from land services staff, and we don't want to have that liability that if we go out and set an OHW and we're wrong, then all of a sudden it's on us because now they have a
I think
potential
that's what
setback
happened in
violation.
2024. There was some issues there where
We tried to help somebody locate the OHW on Horseshoe Lake, and there was some miscommunication there and at the end of the day, it's on, the ordinance is very clear that it is the responsibility of the applicant to be in compliance with the ordinance and to locate, their structures in the right spot. But when we help out and we're there, people will want, they'll use what we say too. So it's kind of a balancing act of that. We can go to the next slide. Patios, so we allow patios up to 250 square foot and, up to 400 square foot in Shore Impact Zone 2, the second half of the setback with a stormwater management plan. Needs to be, we count that towards your total impervious limits on the lot. And so that's one of the things that we permit quite a bit, is people enjoy having their patios, so you can have a little fire pit in that area down to enjoy the lake. You go to the next slide?
So if you don't have a 120 foot or 120 square foot little house down there or a little storage shed down there, can you have a 120 foot patio there?
Yes, yep, so that's, yep, so
And
down by
but
the.
can you have both?
No, you get you get one water-oriented accessory structure, so you can either have a patio or you can have a little shed.
Okay.
You get one or the other.
In zone 1, or what do
Yes.
you call it?
Yep, correct,
Shore impact zone 1.
correct, yep. We also required to permit stairways and lifts and landings and boardwalks. And so the maximum width of a stairway is 4 feet for residential, it's 8 feet for commercial. And then landings, so if you've got a big bluff you're going down, sometimes people want to have break up the steps so they don't have to go down 100 steps at one time. So a landing is limited to a 4x8 size, 32 square feet. It's 64 square feet on the commercial, and then we also regulate boardwalks, so those areas, we have those riparian lots that have wetlands that you have to get out to the lake, and so we allow those to be up to 6 feet wide, and so that's something else that we would permit. That's, the boardwalks aren't listed in 6120, that is a higher standard that Crow Wing County has than what the shoreline rules would allow for boardwalks.
I find it interesting, no restriction on construction material, so you could literally do a concrete steps right down and through, 4 feet wide, right down to wherever you wanted it.
Yep. Yep. Next slide.
And it didn't matter what kind of lake.
No,
Matter if it's a natural environmental
No, it
lake
doesn't.
or whatever,
No.
you can go right down.
there's no, the only thing that really matters for lakes as far as performance standards would be the setbacks and the lot size for when you're creating new lots. Those are performance standards for the different lake classifications. But when you're looking at these different activities, it doesn't matter what lake you're on as far as if you can have steps to the lake, if you can have a patio, or if those sorts of things. Those aren't something that the lake classification has an impact on.
Thank you.
Decks are allowed, you gotta meet setbacks unless you have a structure that was built prior to 1970. Then you can, there's a 15% allowance that allows you to build a deck that would not need a variance. And then there's always, we have the ordinance of 4-foot walkway, so there's situations where people will build right up to their 75-foot setback, and then they'll have a sliding patio door. They can build a 4-foot walkway out to get access out of that, and a lot of times they'll build a deck off the side, or there'll be steps to get down to the lawn and that.
So 15% of what?
Of the current setback, so let's say somebody is 50 feet away from the lake, you take 15% of that, and that's the actual width that you get, the depth towards the lake, and then the maximum square footage is 250 square feet. And you can't be any closer than 30 feet to the lake. But that's only for those structures that were built before zoning regulations. For us, it would have been 1972, is when we started officially zoning, would have been in 1972. You can go to that next slide. Retaining walls are allowed as a way to control erosion. The maximum height is 4 feet, and if it goes up, if you need to go higher than 4 feet, then they're required to be tiered. And then we want to make sure we understand the dirt moving amounts that are associated with that, because that limits that. And then we only regulate retaining walls in shore impact zone 1 and 2. We don't regulate those in the we're meeting the setback. We don't regulate them back there, just in the building setback. You can go to the next one. So shoreline vegetation removal, right now, we have requirements for general development and recreational development lakes, which basically says you cannot have intensive vegetation removal along the lake, except to allow for an access path, steps and lifts and landings, a shoreline recreational use area, which I'll talk about in the next slide, and then to ensure that there's screening from the lake and from the river. We currently have standards right now for natural environment lakes that requires a permit for vegetation removal and a 25-foot buffer, except to allow for your rec area, stairways, lifts and landings, and the water or accessory structure. You can go to the next slide, please. I guess I thought I had them out of order, I thought. Lakes that don't have a public landing are allowed to have their own watercraft access ramp, 15 feet wide, can't be, have any asphalt or bituminous, can't be located in the wetlands, and they may require a separate DNR permit to do that as well. Go to the next slide, please. So the shoreline recreation use area, what this is we're saying, and this is something we put in place back in 2010, is that if you want to put in, say, like a sand blanket or that sort of activity, you can do that for 30% of your shoreline. So if you've got a 100-foot wide lot, you can take 30% of that shoreline, and you can come back 25 feet, and that's where you can put in a sand blanket if you don't have a beach on your property. And so this is something that we see quite a bit, where people want to have little beach areas for kids, grandkids, et cetera, and we permit a fair amount of these. We can go to the next slide.
And they can just put that sand blanket right over whatever vegetation is there?
Well, they can't put it can't be located in a wetland, and so it'd have to be on an upland area. Typically, most people will kill the vegetation, put down like a liner so to prevent weed growth from coming up and that. So typically what they'll have, like a weed preventer cloth that allow the water to go through, but it won't allow the weeds to come up. So again, as we talked about sand blankets, these need to be above the ordinary high water mark, because if you dump sand in the lake, then you get to go, DNR has a process for that. Again, it follows the same parameter I just mentioned with the shore and rec area, 30% of the lot width, you go 25 feet back, and then can't be on slopes that are greater than 10%. So if it's a very steep slope, you can't do it, because we don't want to have happens every time it rains, that sand just keeps washing off into the lake. So it's got to be a relatively flat area to be allowed to have that. We go to the next slide. So dirt moving amounts, the state shoreline rules require that anytime anybody wants to move dirt, which is either bring it in or manipulate dirt on site, there's a 10-yard allowance without having to get a permit. And anything over 10 yards requires a permit. What we have done is said that our ordinance is more restrictive. If you want to do any dirt moving on the lake, you've got to come get a permit from us. And so in Shore Impact Zone 1, you're limited to 30 cubic yards. In Shore Impact Zone 2, you're limited to 50. In Shore Impact, and then the rear lot zone, or which is the area beyond the building setback, you're limited to 100 cubic yards. If you want to exceed those amounts, it's a conditional use permit. So if you need to move 50 cubic yards in Shore Impact Zone 1, you have to get approval from the Planning Commission Board of Adjustment to do that. Ice ridges. This is one that is, I think, one of the more important things that we regulate. So an ice ridge is that area where over the years wind and ice have pushed up the lake bed materials up on the shore. A historic ice ridge is what you exactly see there. You've got trees growing out of it, very well-established vegetation. We want to keep that on the landscape because it does a great job for managing stormwater runoff. It keeps the stormwater runoff from going into the lake. And so if you wanted to have any sort of manipulation of that, it's a 15-foot wide cut into that bank. And then you have to have a diversion up top so that you're not creating a direct slope into the water, into the lake for stormwater runoff. So that's a historic ice ridge. If we go to the next slide, it should be our annual ice ridge. This is the ones that come up sometimes every year, and we don't require a permit for that. If within the year that it happens, you can regrade that back to its previous elevation. They would need to make sure that they get some vegetation growing on that as soon as possible so that they can get that stabilized. But the reason, if this picture I think really tells the story. If you look at the top of the picture, you see a lot of vegetation growing there. And if you go beyond that picture, you don't see any ice push coming up. In this area here, this would have been a mowed lawn where they mowed it right down to the water's edge. The ice pushed up because there's no vegetation, and the deep roots of native vegetation hold that shoreline in more than people maybe want to give it credit for. And this is an example, and I think a great picture of showing the difference of that. So
What's that stick or whatever it is sticking out of the water?
actually that's a gauge that the DNR uses for for lake elevation.
Back to packet page 30, when you said the amount of yards of dirt that can be moved with permit, who makes sure that that's the number of yards they do? If we have a permit, just because they got a permit, does that mean everybody abides by their permit right to the letter, or do they some people maybe take some liberties with that?
Well, and so one of the things that we require, if you want to come in and get a shoreline alteration permit for dirt moving, you're going to have to show us, you're going to have to do some math. So you're going to have to show us, so if you want to figure out a cubic yard is, basically a foot by a foot by a foot divided by 27, that'll tell you how many cubic yards. And so we're going to have them, so when they want to do excavation, we're having them show us the geometry of, we're going to make this triangle cut here so we can do this. And so we're very specific on how many cubic yards of dirt that they're allowed to get approved for. And then I want to say thank you to the board because we have inspectors and we have staff that can go out and look at these properties and verify. And so we have staff that are going out, they're out every day inspecting properties. And so, for example, the goal for staff is that I want each one of the field staff, there's 5 of them, I want 100 inspections per month per person. And so if you take that over a construction season, you know, we're looking to get anywhere between 3,500 to, you know, inspections per summer. And that's out making sure that these permits are being done right. And do we have silt fence up? And did they build in the proper location? We're in the process right now of following up on every riparian permit that was issued this year and follow up for ones last year that weren't completed to make sure that they were done right. So every permit gets an inspection. So every time we issue a permit, we're out in the field looking at it before we issue the permit. We're following up during the season while it's being done, and then we follow up at the end to make sure that it was done the way it was supposed to. So, and I just want to say thank you because we have the staff to do that. Not all counties have that. I was on a call today with some counties who were talking with DNR about maybe some riprap standards, and I heard every county who are lake counties similar to us say, I'd love to get out and do more inspections. I just don't have the staff. And I just kept my mouth shut.
And I think those
because
inspections
we do have the staff, and I'm just grateful for it. So I want you to know from a staff perspective, I appreciate it. That's an investment, I think, in what we do in the program, and the value is there when we're out doing these inspections and working with landowners and contractors, you know, to help them do the right thing.
And I've been called out or asked to be either by the property owner or by the person doing the work to come out and just stand there. But I'm not an expert in that area. I might just stand there
Right.
to see how it's done. And it's done, you know, maybe the guys aren't all 6'5" that own the property, but, you know, most of the time, I think it's an amenable working out the problem.
We're there to solve problems. That's our goal. Implement the ordinance, help people solve problems, and to try to, you know, get things to work. There are times that we have to say no, but our goal is to try to find options and solutions to the problems that people have so they can accomplish what they want on their property. That's our priority.
But I've also been out on the ones which have taken the permits and stuff and kind of either, I won't say, maybe took a little more leeway with what they felt they had for a permit.
We have people make bad choices, and
That's a good way of putting it.
and so when they make bad choices, unfortunately, we have to step in sometimes and you know, strive for voluntary compliance. If that doesn't work, we work with the county attorney's office. I mean, we have one in Commissioner Corning's district right now that was a variance approved back during COVID, and they built, and it was not done right. And it's been in their office for a couple of years, and we're finally getting a court date set up in December. The stuff it just takes time in some of those issues, and unfortunately, it's just the way that it works sometimes. So.
And that's what I run into up in at least the area I serve, you know, because we have so many lakes is, you know, well, they let them do it over here, why can't I do it on my property?
Well, the response I always have is, well, who got to do what where? I want to go take a
And
look
what
at that.
time?
And then we'll go figure that out, and then we'll talk about that, and then we'll come back and have a
Because
conversation.
we have
about that
tightened up
property.
some of our ordinances.
Yeah, exactly. Can we go to the next slide? Next couple, maybe? Get up to. So again, bluffs, this is one of the bigger things that we deal with. There's a lot of them up in the north part of the county. Basically, it's a steep slope that's 25 feet in height and has a 30% slope, and it drains towards the public water. That's really what a bluff is. And so there's definite bluff regulations. There's a 30-foot setback from the top of a bluff, and vegetation and dirt moving are very much regulated in those areas because they're highly erodible when you get those bluff areas. And once you get vegetation removed, they tend to erode very easily and very quickly, as you can see, you know, from this picture here. Go to the next slide. The Mississippi River, just real quick, Crow Wing County is a part of the Mississippi Headwaters Board, which is an 8-county joint powers board that regulates and manages the first 400 miles of the Mississippi River. Commissioner Barrows is a member of the MHB, if I remember correctly, is the voting member for Crow Wing. And so for us, that's why it's 500 feet from both sides of the river is what we regulate. The setback is 150 feet. Dirt moving limits are much more restrictive. You can only do 10 yards with a permit, and then anything after that requires special approvals. Everything is governed by the Mississippi Headwaters Board and Tim Terrell, who's the executive director. It has its own set of regulations that we have to follow that are separate from the county ordinance. And so we definitely have conversation with folks about what they can and cannot do on the Mississippi River. Next slide. Again, we're just going to jump into just a couple more rules. As I mentioned earlier, this is 8420, the Wetland Conservation Act. This is basically a rule intended to manage wetlands across the state of Minnesota. The goal is to achieve a no net loss in the quantity, quality, and biological diversity of Minnesota's existing wetlands. We go to the next page. They basically categorize the state in how many existing pre-settlement wetlands we have. We are considered an 80% county. So that means we still have 80% of our pre-settlement wetlands. You head south, like into Morrison County, they're at 50 to 80%. And that just, based on that, it has limitations on how much wetland activities can happen without having to go through certain different types of permit processes. This is something that we're mandated to do. Some counties have delegated that authority to their soil and water conservation district. Some have decided to keep it for the county staff to do. It's all at the discretion of the board as far as how that gets implemented. We can go to the next slide.
Is that why maybe you see some of the planning commissions or board of adjustments have people sitting on it that are actually from soil and water?
Correct. So anytime that once a month, we have what's called the technical evaluation panel, and that is made up of county staff, staff from the Board of Water and Soil Resources, and the Soil and Water Conservation District. And if it's from the Shoreline District, the DNR is invited as well. And then they make a recommendation to the county as far as different applications to approve or deny. You've delegated to me, I am the wetland conservation administrator for the county, and so you've delegated to me the authority to make the final decisions on any of those wetland applications that come in. But we typically will run those through the technical evaluation panel to get feedback, and then we'll go through that process after that. Minnesota Rule 7080 is where we manage septic systems across the state, or across the county. This is a little bit different than when you look at the shoreline rules. The shoreline rules, every city and county and township that has its own P&Z has to meet the minimum standards. And so the county board, our county ordinance does not set the standard for Nisswa or for Cross Lake. They get to have their own ordinance. It just has to meet the minimum requirements of 6120. 7080 is a little bit different in that the county does set the bar for the septic ordinance. So when we adopt an ordinance, all the cities and townships that implement their own septic system ordinance has to meet the minimum standards of the county ordinance as well. And if a city chooses to not do its own septic program, we are required by rule that we have to implement that ordinance in their municipality for them. So if we work with, like, say, Brainerd, we do their septic systems because they don't have very many, just on the fringe parts of Brainerd is where they have septic systems in that. But so that's something that we're required to do and to manage, and septic systems. If you look, even like this year we've already installed 403 septic systems. We had 186 new houses, and so a lot of those septics that got implemented this year are upgrades and replacements for systems that are failing and old and needed to be upgraded. So.
And is there any city in Crow Wing County right now that's administering their own 7080 rules?
Nisswa does. Most of the cities actually do their own septic system.
I know in Jenkins, we hired somebody to come in and do our own.
Yeah, how they handle it, they'll typically hire a consultant to review designs.
Otherwise the county would do that?
Otherwise, we're obligated to do it on their behalf. If they don't, then we have to. Yeah. We can go to the next slide. Municipal Rules 4410. This is the section on environmental review. So there are certain requirements, certain projects that are required to have an environmental assessment worksheet, or if it's such a large project, it jumps right into what's called an environmental impact statement. There's mandated requirements in the rule for that. There's also the opportunity where a county can require an environmental assessment worksheet if it so desires. That rests with the authority with the county board to make that decision. There's also a petition authority where if neighbors think that a certain project has potential environmental effects, they have to get a petition with 100 signatures, submit to the Environmental Quality Board. That gets submitted to the county board, then you decide if you think the EAW is required or not to do. So it's all the discretionary environmental assessment worksheets are at the discretion of the county board. When it's mandatory, then we go through the process of developing the environmental assessment worksheet, and then it comes back to the county board, and then you have the decision does it require an environmental impact statement or not. So that's the kind of the role, and depending on the process, there's EEW requirements for large developments. A lot of different types of projects have requirements for this. So it's another piece that if we're they call it a regulated government unit, so it depends, certain activities, the county might be the RGU, certain activities the DNR is, certain activities the MPCA is. It depends on the project, who the actually regulatory government unit is responsible for development of that environmental assessment worksheet. We can go to the next slide. Yep, we'll go to the next one too.
Is that
Again,
the environmental impact statement? What is that?
environmental impact statement is where typically it's where an environmental assessment worksheet was done, and the governing board said, we don't think we have enough information about these topics. So then you get more specific about, we have concerns about this issue. Then an environmental impact statement is basically a report that talks about what would be, if this project goes through, what will be the impact based on these certain issues or concerns that we have. Environmental impact statements are typically written for building target field or for expansions to airports, huge
projects.
big projects. It's not going to be a 7-lot development on a lake or those sorts of things.
I mean, I've heard people say, well, you know what they should do? They should do an environmental impact statement on this development. It doesn't meet those qualifications or those.
Best case scenario would be an environmental assessment worksheet would be the step, because you wouldn't jump right to an EIS unless it was mandated in the rule. But yeah, so depending on, and that's when they have to get that petition process in place and submit that to Environmental Quality Board, and they have to determine if it's a valid petition, then it comes to the board to decide if you want to require that EAW or not.
Is an environmental assessment kind of similar to like a phase 1 or phase 2? Is that kind
That's
of like?
typically part of the process. So phase 1 is part of an EAW, but it's basically, they call it a worksheet, but it used to be a worksheet, but now it's really become a much bigger document, looking at different things like traffic and groundwater, surface water, wildlife habitat, endangered species. You got to look at the soil types, and so it really just it's really meant to inform the decision-making process. I think a lot of people think that an EAW is meant to stop a development process. That's not the intent. It's meant to inform the process so that decision makers have better information to make when deciding to approve or deny a request. So just as a reminder, we're getting to the end of our slides here. The PCBOA for the county is a combined board. It's 5 members. Each member is appointed by the county board. Terms last 2 years. We'll go to the next slide. The Planning Commission and their role, they recommend to you plats, land use map amendments, ordinance text amendments, and comprehensive plan development. You have delegated final decision authority for conditional use permits and interim use permits to that board. You go to the next slide.
And then just one other thing is, we're passing the ordinances here and they're carrying out that.
Absolutely. Yep.
That's what their job is.
Their job is to implement the ordinances that you have put into action.
Okay.
Yep. The Board of Adjustment, again, is the final decision authority for variances and appeals. So anytime staff make a decision, so staff says, we're gonna approve a permit for Commissioner Coring, and Commissioner Barrows thinks it's a horrible idea, you have 30 days to appeal that decision to the Board of Adjustment. And then the Board of Adjustment would decide, did staff make the right decision to approve or deny that permit or not? So any decision that staff makes, anybody, they call it an aggrieved party, can make an appeal to the Board of Adjustment, and that's a $500 fee. And then they go to the Board of Adjustment, and the board decides if they would affirm or not.
Would he do that to me, the chairman?
I don't know,
Yes,
maybe.
he would.
I don't know if he lives in Long Lake Township, so I think you're probably safe, but,
You have to start a savings account.
and then any decision that the Board of Adjustment makes, as far as a variance, that gets appealed to district court, and that's a 30-day window. And so if the and if you go back to the Board of Adjustment with that staff appeal, whatever decision that they make is then appealable to district court as well. So it's a process of appeals depending on where you're at in that process. Go to the next slide. Yeah, I just went over this a second ago. So the tops would be district court would be for variances, plats, land use map amendments, ordinance amendments, staff decisions, and then conditional use permits and interim use permits. Those get appealed to 60 days. And then any district court decisions. So if somebody takes a variance to district court, they don't like it, they can take it to the Court of Appeals, and if they want to, they can try to work their way up to the Supreme Court if they're not getting what they want. So it can work their way up the chain of going through the judicial process. Can we go to the next slide? The townships, so what's their role in this? We always have that question. I wanted to cover that again today real quick. So they're always invited to attend our development review team meetings, which are the second and the fourth Monday of each month. They're in the Land Services Building. They start at 9 a.m. for 30 minutes. If we go to the next slide. So how can the townships participate in the process? One is that they can submit written comments on an application. They can submit written comments for DRT. They can come in person to DRT. We have a county form we provided to make it easier for them to fill out. They don't have to use that, but it makes it easier, we think. They can discuss it with the landowner at a township meeting, so the landowner who's applying can come to the township meeting and talk directly to the township. They can provide us facts that would support or deny. We ask that they provide that before the meeting. They can attend the planning commission meeting, oral testimony, they can talk right at the meeting itself. They can contact staff with questions. And so there's a lot of touch points and opportunities for the townships to be involved and have a say in the process.
But at the end of the day, when they've delegated their planning and zoning authority to the county, and they're not doing it on their own, the planning commission is going by the county ordinance.
Every time.
Every
Absolutely.
time.
Yep.
If the township has a different comprehensive plan,
They would then need to draft an ordinance to implement their comprehensive plan. And I've had that conversation with townships in the past, that a comprehensive plan is only as valid as the ordinance that you have in place to implement it. They can provide that to the county as supplemental information, but the county comprehensive plan always trumps the township plan.
yes.
It always trumps.
But I've always said this to the townships that I represent: if you don't like the way the county is doing your planning and zoning in your township, do it yourself.
I think that's always an option, but I think it's important to remember that what we want to try to commit to is uniformity across the county.
Right.
And I think if a lot of townships decide to start to take over their own zoning, I think you start getting a lot of calls about lack of uniformity and consistency and that. And so I would encourage townships to get involved in the process, be part of what we're working on, and, and maybe, be part of the solution versus maybe thinking that going on their own might be the right solution. Because unless you've got a township that's very organized and understands the cost and the time and the effort it takes to do it the right way, I think you'll have a citizenry that are disappointed and upset, and you'll probably get calls about that too. So I think either way, you're probably gonna get calls, at least if it's called while it's under county jurisdiction, at least you have the say over how to make some potential changes to affect what that might look like.
If a township adopts their own ordinance and wants to do their own planning and zoning, does their ordinance have to be at least as restrictive as the county's ordinance?
That's a great question. The answer is yes. So 304
As
does
or
require a
not
township that they have to be as restrictive as the county if they want to do their own zoning.
Pretty much the same way with cities, correct?
No.
No, cities can actually be less restrictive.
Cities have to follow the rules that we talked about before, so
Right.
they have to meet the minimum requirements of 6120. And so, if they meet those minimum requirements, they don't have to follow the county minimum standards that we would set as far as more restrictive standards. Unless you're in the septic system world, then you do have to meet the more
Different
restrictive
areas that
standards.
enter into that. I know in the city of Jenkins, we did have smaller lot sizes than the county. Because we had our own planning, because we were a city and did that.
Right.
And typically, that's appropriate in an urban
In a-
sitting
in a
setting.
highly dense area.
Highly dense areas.
I would come back to the fact that have we had enough, a lot of townships, by the time they find out what somebody's doing, unless they're really engaged, they find out kind of like they're already a little bit after the fact, and they maybe react.
Oh,
They should have known about it ahead of time.
They get notice of development review team meetings a week before the meeting, and we haven't even had an application come in yet. That's just a pre-discussion. Let's just chat about what you want to do. And then once DRT is completed, then the application process starts, and then the timeline becomes much more close because we have to do things within certain timeframes to get to the meeting
right,
date.
the 30-day rule.
And so when townships don't participate in the development review team process, they feel like it's a short process because they weren't at the beginning.
They
Yeah.
didn't follow it.
And unfortunately, the reality is, we have a handful of townships that are very active coming to the development review team process. And there are other townships that are more developed, I mean, where they see more applications, so I can understand that. But sometimes, you know, there are certain applications that happen in other townships, and sometimes they'll be disgruntled, and it's like, we wish you'd have been at the beginning, you know, we could have helped set the stage a little bit so they could have had a little more impact and influence on the decision.
And believe it or not all county boards agree, or township boards agree with each other.
That's another piece of the puzzle.
Can't believe it. So another question, so let's just say, this isn't kind of a hypothetical, but what if a city, let's just say, for example, Nisswa, let's say they, I don't know, let's say they're frustrated with doing their own planning and zoning, and they say, we just don't want to do it anymore. What happens then? Do they have to contract with somebody or contract with the county? We don't just automatically take over, kind of like we're doing with the townships. I would think it'd be kind of a difference.
So that's a really good point. And so 394 allows counties and cities to work together on planning and zoning if they so choose.
Okay.
And so a city that has a lake in it that's bigger than 10 acres in size is obligated to have a zoning ordinance that regulates the shoreline district. They are not required to have any other zoning in their city outside of that, just like the county is. We're only required to regulate around the lakes. Outside the lakes are where we have the ag forested, if we didn't want to regulate that, we would not be required to do that. We are also not obligated, because if a city chooses to not do its own zoning, we are not obligated to go into that city and do their zoning for them. We're not required to do that, except for septic systems. We do have to do it for that, so if a city doesn't want to do it, that's between them and the state of Minnesota as far as
Then
having
who would
ordinance.
step in if they defaulted on?
The DNR. So the DNR is responsible in rule to make sure that all municipalities that have any sort of a shoreline, you have lakes, rivers, or streams, that they have an ordinance, that they're meeting minimum requirements, and that they're implementing that ordinance. So that's a state requirement to make sure that that's happening.
So then, when we were helping Cross Lake with their planning and zoning, but we contracted
There was agreement between the county board and the city council for the county to provide services to the city to implement their ordinance. Yep. Yeah, it was not something that we
Implement
had to
their
do.
ordinances or our ordinances?
That was there.
Because didn't they have their own ordinances in Cross Lake?
It was theirs, but they adopted basically ours verbatim for the most, except for a few changes in some certain areas, but for the 95% of it was probably considered, you know, would be very comparable, and it's still very similar today, even after we've been gone for 5 years up there. It's still very similar to what the county ordinances, which is great. I mean, you want uniformity. It'd be great if the city and the counties could all try to work out some of these things and have similar standards on the lakes, but
Thank you.
we can just keep going. I know we're running on it, we're way past time, so we can go to the next. I think we'll just skip this. If anybody has questions when you get, you know, any of your constituents, 824-1010. Just have them give us a call. We're happy to answer questions, happy to meet people on site. We're happy to give you an update afterwards if you want to know kind of what we discussed and what was talked about. But feel free to please send people our way. We're happy to help with that. I can't help Steve and Baxter. I don't know, you're just stuck with the city. But for those of you at the townships, we're happy to help, so.
Thanks for this. I think it's helpful.
Is anybody in the back still awake, or are they all?
I don't know.
Good thing we had coffee.
I'm sure they're at the edge of their seats.
So the next part, just wanted to,
Jamie has a question, I think.
Oh,
Go ahead, Jamie.
I'm sorry, I thought you were done. I was going to make a comment, but finish what you were saying.
no, I was just gonna jump into the ordinance, but the ordinance update.
Okay, I'll just make my observation and you can continue on. I guess the observation I had is that, you know, it's the way we have things set up right now. It's okay for a lake homeowner to remove a portion of vegetation for their yard down to the water's edge. They can do 120, up to 120 square feet of any material, so they could, for a patio or a shed or a paved asphalt paved boat landing, or they could do milling tailings, or asphalt millings for steps down to the water's edge. Vegetation, mats that stop any vegetation from growing. Got fertilizers, weed killers, bug sprays, all that runoff that goes into the lake from those. But yet, the farmer with the 40 cars out in his field is the problem. It's an observation. We've talked about it before. I don't care for that viewpoint on it. I just want to make it, knowing that there's a lot more going on there than just a poor farmer out there because he's got antique cars sitting out in his field. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but each one of those lake homes that has a paved driveway going into their yard has more oil on the ground than that farmer does. So that's all I got. Thanks.
Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for that comment, Jamie. Appreciate that. And the next thing we have would be just to go over, we have some proposed land use ordinance updates at your spots there. You'll see I've got a fun color-coded little memo for you. The areas that you would see in green would be just some housekeeping items. The areas that are in yellow would be some more significant policy items. The areas that are in blue are related to the septic system ordinance that the MPCA has reached out to us and said, you need to make some updates to your ordinance. And so that's kind of what those colors are. I'm going to just kind of go through these and just kind of go over them. And if there's any questions, let me know. Article 2.1, we just have a carryover of RR20 that needs to be deleted. Article 8.7, as I mentioned earlier, when we have an appeal of a staff decision, right now our ordinance says that we have to hear that appeal within 30 days. It depends on when that appeal application happens. I can't get 30 days to the meeting because there's just not enough time to make it fit. And so I'd like to amend that to give us a 60-day window to hear that, so we have time to make the proper notifications, publications, and that, and we don't have enough time sometimes, depending on when the application comes in and when somebody wants to file that appeal. So Article 9.5, right now, if you look at our subdivision ordinance, we have administrative subdivisions where you're allowed, if you're basically non-riparian lots, if you remember, all riparian lots need to have a plat. Non-riparian lots, you can create, if you're in the first assessment district, 3 lots every 5 years. And if you're out of the first assessment, it's 5 lots every 3 years. Unless you're in Mission Township, then it's 3 years every 5 years. So Mission Township's kind of our outlier. But what we wanted to clarify is that when we talk about these lots, we just need to clarify that we're talking about lots that are less than 10 acres in size. Because anything that's over 10 acres is exempt from having to get approval from the county.
I mean, you
And
could
so
do
we're
a
just
simple
adding
land divide.
clarification.
If you had 40 acres, you could do a land divide, and you don't have to abide by any of this, right?
You don't, yep, as long as it's 10 acres in size, 300
Right.
feet wide, then you don't have to come get approval from us. You're able to basically record a deed with the recorder's office, with a recording team in our office. So if we get into our article, the yellow part here, there's a couple things that I'd like to just chat with the board about a little bit, and maybe we could go back to the ordinance and go to Article 11.20. Right now we have, so just to maybe take a step back, when we talked earlier about performance standards, the state has put performance standards in place for different lake classifications, and that's based on lot size, lot width, and lake setbacks. There aren't any specifications in the rule that say, are there different vegetation requirements for different lakes? Are there different stormwater requirements for different lakes? Those are pretty standard across the board. There really is a performance standard for those based on your lake classification. And right now we have standards for general development and recreational development lakes. Then we have a separate standard for natural environment lakes. And what I'm proposing is that we would take all of the standards that we have and make them the standards for one lake, for all of our lakes and of our rivers would be our 11.20A. The big difference is that in 11.20B for natural environment lakes, it says that any vegetation removal requires a permit. I can just be honest and say that really isn't happening as far as that from people getting permits for that type of thing. And then it requires there to be a 25-foot buffer on those lakes. Otherwise, everything else is the same. And what I'd like to do is combine all that up into 11.20, where we have the same standard for the same lakes. We're not trying to look at different standards for different lakes. But when we go down to 11.20C, our shore rec area, if we go to the next page. So if somebody were to come in the office today and they were to have a 100-foot wide lot and they were to say, I want to put a sand blanket in, and they'd mowed their grass right down to the water's edge, we would permit them to put in a 30-foot wide by 25-foot deep, and they could put their sand blanket into there, and then everything else stays the same. What I would like to do, and after Gary and I, after we've talked about this, would be to say, yep, you can have that sand blanket, you can have that recreational use area, but what we want to do is get that area that outside of that, within that 25 foot, just don't mow that. We want that to be more of a native vegetated buffer, and so that's really replaces that 25-foot standard that we have for natural environment. Instead of having it for a natural environment lake, I'd like to have it for all of our lakes. And I think Debbie sent out in her recent update to you guys a study that was put out by the DNR that said that it's called Losing Minnesota Shorelines, or Vanishing Shorelines, and we're losing dramatic amounts of natural shoreline across the state of Minnesota. It's happening statewide. And I think this is an opportunity for Crow Wing County to kind of show some leadership opportunity to say, hey, we think we have a way where we can help people still use their shoreline. They still get the beach. They still get what they want to use. We want to see the rest of that area out there be left into that more native buffer to help with some of those issues that Jamie was bringing up, stormwater runoff, buffers, and that would help stop erosion issues on shorelines that we're seeing. And so that's a significant policy change, and I'd like to bring that up for discussion.
And then to expand on that, so you're saying 100-foot lot, if I wanted a sand bed, I could have that,
30 feet wide.
right? But then you're saying all of it left natural,
In
how
that
far back?
25 feet. So
25
it would
feet.
match that same distance. It would match that same distance as your sand blanket.
I don't agree with that.
Yeah.
In the recreational and general development lakes, I can see that as helping the water. In looking at it, doing it in the natural environment lakes, you're actually, to me, just looking at what it is and what we talked about, you're actually lowering the standard. You're not keeping that. The natural environment lake already has that. I know we're not managing it, and I know we're not going there and checking every natural environment lake to make sure they're mowing it, but the standard is there to hold them to right now. And by what you're looking at, I can see going for the general development to try to get the recreational lakes in general development to try to mediate that storm water, to get that vegetation to grow on the shoreline, which not only helps just the water quality, it also, as we've seen on that one slide, when we have these, lately we seem to have some pretty big ice ridges coming in, some spring ice ridges, and those lakes that have the vegetation on the shoreline manage it well, a lot better than one that's been rip-wrapped and mowed down to the lake. So that's the only question I have, is are we lowering the standard to the natural environment lakes?
I don't think we're lowering it. We still have the standards as far as, limited vegetation removal in shore impact zone 1 regardless. And so I don't think we're losing anything. I think what we're trading, I mean, not when you say trading, but vegetation, we don't see a lot of vegetation removal issues on natural environment lakes because people buy to live on a natural environment lake because they want to live on a natural environment lake. And so I do think that increasing the vegetation on our general development and recreational development lakes, I think would be important. Now, maybe 25 feet is not the right number. Is there a number that might make more sense? Would it, is the right number 10 feet? Is it 15 feet? I'm not, I'm curious if there's a number there, because that's something that's been pointed out from a state perspective of helps with water quality, helps with wildlife habitat, is to have that, to not be mowing your grass right down to the water's edge. And so just curious if there's a potential number that might make sense.
I mean, it's definitely changing it for the people that have a recreational or general development lake that want to see this pristine,
Right.
see their shoreline,
Yep.
see grass right up there, nice riprap, an area for the sand blanket, for the patio thing. You're saying now, that, we really want you to have some vegetation growing over here.
Correct. That's the goal.
Then that's the goal. So that's clawing it back a little bit from what's been happening. Where the natural environment, like you're saying, maybe you can clear a little more down here than you have been able to in the past by putting that in there.
And if the desire was, we could leave the natural environment standards as they are in there today and still have this other piece maybe for general development and for the recreational development lakes. I mean, that's definitely an option too, so.
So question for you, Chris. The ones that currently have the whole 100 feet there, mow it right to the lake,
Yep.
they still would keep that. This would be going forward, or would we go back and try
This
to?
would be for people who came through for a permit. So if they came in for a permit to say, I'd like to put a sand blanket in, I'd like to do this
Okay.
recreational use area, that's when this would kick in. But if they didn't want to, and they didn't want to have a sand blanket, this is not something that would be able to come in. Because that's considered a legal nonconformity, the way they've got with the vegetation now. It's been that way for a long time, and we can't come back now and make them change that. We can work with the new lots that, but the older lots, this is an opportunity for us to kind of try to retrofit if you need a permit. If you want to come in, it's kind of like a little bit of a trade-off. If you want to come in and maybe get some sand blanket, we'd like to get some vegetation growing, reestablished along your shoreline.
So if a house sells, it's still going to stay the way it is. They're
Correct.
purchasing it the
Yep.
way it is.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
If
it
it's
would
already been
transfer.
done, it's already there. I mean, if we put our standards in place that we have today and went out there and said, everybody has to go back to those standards, this room would be full. Because
Right.
you would have places that aren't able to do what's already been done.
And we only regulate the vegetation removal in shore impact zone 1, so the first half of that setback. Once you get into shore impact zone 2, that's where you can have your lawn and you can mow that, and, so that would be for today. We had a situation up in, Commissioner Lupke's district where they really massacred and really took out a lot of vegetation on a lot, and we made them do a vegetation restoration plan. They had to, we had them give financial assurance of $50,000 to make sure that it got done right, and we're working on that because they violated our ordinance as far as vegetation removal. And so this is just an opportunity to go back and try to work with some folks to try to encourage them to get some vegetation along that shoreline.
How are you going to enforce this? I mean, are you going to, what about, they do this and then 3 years down the road, are you going to send a staff person out there to see are they mowing it? Are you going to send a tape measure with them? And you're going to make sure, and then what's the penalty going to be? How much is the penalty going to be if they're not abiding by it?
Well, I mean, if they got a permit and were required to have that, to have that buffer on the shoreline, we have staff that go out and do inspections, and we're verifying that. And if it turned out that we, went out, let's say, for the next 2 years and we did our inspection, and everything was fine, we wouldn't go back out again unless we got a complaint from somebody, so.
I just think this would be just another ordinance that we're just like the problem I'm having now. I didn't know we had a surface water ordinance. And when the guy emailed me, he says, well, why aren't you enforcing you have an ordinance, you're not enforcing it. And I don't even know if it's going to be enforced. So no, I don't think this is a good idea. Maybe environmentally it's probably a good idea, but I'm not going to support this. I'll just vote no. If the rest want it, fine.
The only thing that triggers this is that they're coming in for a permit.
Correct.
If you don't come in for a permit, nothing changes for what you have, how you're
Exactly.
using your shoreline, how it's been.
Yep.
Where it's at. I mean, we see people right now on some of the watershed plans that I serve on and some of the, a lot of the lake association, some of the other stuff where they're looking at saying, how can we put that buffer in on this lake property we bought? And they're doing areas where they're building, whether it be pollinator gardens or they're building areas that they're allowing to let those come back in a lot that they bought 15, 20 years ago that was riprap right to the lake, and they're spending money doing that. I know Soil and Water is working with a lot of property owners to try to get some of that back because they see the long-range benefit of it. So if nobody's changing anything, they're not coming in for a permit, this isn't really gonna affect them.
Correct.
Whatever we have in our ordinance.
Correct.
You know, that,
Yep.
of trying to tighten it up. But if somebody is gonna be coming in to do that, then it'll help them to where we can buffer some more of that, keep that stormwater out of there. I did not realize until I got involved in this, how much of that runoff impacts the water quality of our lakes. And in Crow Wing County, we run on water. You know, our whole tax structure, we're a lake-centric county. And if, like somebody said, you know, if you got rid of all the lakes in Crow Wing County, or somebody said that about the state, you get rid of northern Minnesota and all the lakes, all we have is Kansas. You know, and I think that's really important that we really protect those, because they are a lifeblood to this county as far as our resources that we have to run our county, so.
I guess I'm gonna, just one more thing on this. I guess I look at it more of education of us at the county, possibly trying to invite ourselves to these lake association meetings and stress the importance of this and have that be optional. For example, the lake that I live on, the Lake Association has the program called the Lake Stewardship Program, where they have to fill out, and it's with some other groups, and you fill out this form, and there's a couple Lake Association members that come out and do an assessment, and if they pass this assessment, then voila, they have this beautiful sign that they can put out and say, "I'm a lake steward. I'm trying to buffer down by the lake." I guess I'd rather just see it be more of an educational and voluntary thing rather than, you know, you mowed, instead of 25 feet, you've mowed, there's only 20 feet. Now there's going to be a fine. We can't even get all the stuff done that we want now. The county attorney's office is so busy. So this would just be another ordinance that I don't know that we'd be enforcing it. And like I said, I don't think you need this in there.
Well, as a reminder, we have an ordinance now that requires shoreline buffers if you have impervious over 20% on your lot. And so we already have a provision that requires buffers for certain permits. So this wouldn't be anything new. It would just be a different opportunity depending on the type of permit requested, I guess.
And once they file the permit, the whole thing, the follow-up on the permit and stuff is all on us, no matter what we're doing down there.
Correct. Yep.
So anything we can do to enhance our water quality, because we have so much pressure on our lakes, I think is something that's positive.
So I'll just jump down to a couple other items to hit, since I'm way past time, and I apologize for that. We have some dirt moving permit limits, and when the permit is, so we want to line those permits up from 3 years to 2 years for dirt moving. Right now, it says you can move dirt every 3 years, but the permit is good for 2 years, so we need to line that up so it's more in line with when the permit would be issued. The area that's in blue are all areas that basically the MPCA, we adopted our most recent ordinance back about 2013 or so, and we used the model ordinance that PCA had at that time, and they found a few holes in the model ordinance, and so they followed back up with us and said these are some changes that we would be required to make, and that's what you see here in blue. And so that really is just more housekeeping. It doesn't really have a big impact on business, but it does, the state says there are certain requirements that we have to include and clarify and modify, and so that's what those areas that you see in blue. The area that's in yellow is another, at the very bottom for 37.26 B4. That is a bigger change that the PCA is requiring us to make. So right now, if it's the wintertime and somebody wants to come in and say they want to get a permit to build a deck and they have to get a compliance inspection, they can sign what's called a winter window, and they can say, I'll get that compliance inspection completed by June 1st of the following year. We've been allowing that as well for septic designs for new houses, and the PCA said we can't keep doing that. We cannot issue a permit for a new house without having a design for that as well. And so we won't be able to do those winter windows for that going forward into the future. going to jump down into Article 46, definitions. Could you go to the definition section, Amber, and look under resort? It'll be towards the end. Perfect. Right now, if we go, yeah, let's just stay here. So right now we have a definition for what's called a shared capital resort, which basically means that we regulate and allow personal use of resorts to be limited to 42 days per year. And so we have some resorts in the county that basically sell shares of these resorts. And we've had a request to eliminate the shared capital and not limit it to 42 days. But we also then, if you go back to the next page up, well, it's going to be kind of, I guess, right in between the two, is to basically, when we talk about resort traditional, is to make sure we define that as making sure that it has to be provided for rental more than 50% of the time during their operational season. So that would allow, this would allow a resort, for example, Rutgers, to be able to sell shares, which is what their business model is built off of, be similar to what you see up at Clamshell Beach, up in Commissioner Lupke's district. And so right now, the 42-day limit was put in place back around 2006. There was a committee at that point about how to better maybe regulate and protect resorts, I think, in the area. And this is a carryover from that. And so part of the request for the ordinance update is to delete the shared capital resort definition and to modify the resort traditional definition.
I think we're good.
Just real quick, from a timeline, our goal would be to start the comment period today, and we'll go through November 21st. And then we would have a Planning Commission Board of Adjustment work session before their meeting on November 20th. We would hold a public hearing before the Planning Commission at December 18th at the regular meeting there. We would circle back and have a discussion with the board on the 23rd of December for Committee of the Whole. And then we would then eventually come back and come back to the board on December 30th at the last meeting of the year for final review of the ordinance proposal.
Has the planning commission reviewed any of this stuff at this point yet, or is this?
They've been
first,
provided the summary, and they've been told about today's meeting and encourage them to watch the meeting and participate. But that's why we're having the working session with them at the meeting coming up next month, and then we'll proceed with the planning, with the public hearing the following month in December.
Thank you.
Any thoughts, direction, where you want me to head on this?
The only thing is I guess I'm in favor of everything else except that, what number was it?
Oh, sorry.
11.2.
2?
Yep, 11.20C.
Can you check the tea leaves on that, or?
I would suggest you go forward with the public hearing process of where it's at, and then you're going to have opportunity for feedback from that as well, so we can take it to that step to see what the feedback is, and then the
You
rest
would
of you
also
can kind of
see
weigh
if
in on
there's
that
something-
area.
You know, this is our first time looking at it, so I mean, it wouldn't hurt to have other eyes and people involved and get back to us with.
It's going to come back to you twice before you have to finally make final decision on it. So if you start the public hearing process, you get the public comment, that'll come back to you after that. You can have the opportunity to kind of form a decision for the rest of you who haven't looked through that at this point, given this is the first time you're hearing of it.
Okay.
Work for you?
Good.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Do you want to break, because this next piece is going to be long, too?
Well,
Take a break?
we need
We
to,
move into closed session anyway,
Right.
so if we want to take a couple seconds of a break here while we move into closed session. And we are moving into closed session pursuant to statute 13D05 subdivision 3D for security updates. And we'll convene again in 5 minutes, 3 minutes? 5 minutes.
Deb, before you go, is this my link still going to be active, or do I need to link in somewhere else?
No, Jamie, you're good. Just stay on the line.